The colony burned under a sky that glowed with unnatural light. Flashes of alien ordnance streaked across the horizon, tearing apart the fragile shelters that generations of settlers had built with patient hands. Captain Elias Caron moved through the chaos like a shadow of iron, his pulse rifle tight against his shoulder, his eyes searching for survivors. Every scream, every collapsing wall, every plume of fire carved deeper into his resolve. But what struck him most, the detail that cleaved through the din of battle and pinned itself into his memory, was the silence where children's laughter had once been. The aliens hadn't come for land or resources. They had taken the children. Elias' mind reeled against the savagery of it. The alien species, the Verkael Dominion, waged war with a cold efficiency, always dissecting their enemies with calculation. But this raid had been different. Reports confirmed that the Dominion troops bypassed caches of weapons and stores of food, heading directly for the school shelters. Dozens of boys and girls had been dragged onto their ships, corralled like livestock. Elias could almost hear their cries as they were pulled away, though he had been too far to reach them before the evacuation corridors collapsed. He carried that failure with him now like a brand pressed against his chest. "Captain," Sergeant Davin's gravel-edged voice cut through the static of Elias' comms, grounding him in the moment. Davin approached with the same soldier's gait he had carried through 3 campaigns, armor-scorched, eyes hard. "The Dominion vessels are breaking orbit. They've got the kids." They didn't even bother with the rest of the colony. Elias didn't flinch. They wanted leverage. Bait. His voice was low, steady, yet coiled with fury. "They think if they hold children, we'll crawl into their traps like animals." Maybe they're right. Davin's tone wasn't hesitant, but challenging. His loyalty never wavered, but he had a soldier's instinct to weigh the impossible. A squad against a Dominion dreadnought? You know how that ends. Elias turned his eyes toward the night sky, where pinpricks of fire marked the ascending enemy ships. "It ends the way it has to. They're children, Davin. If we leave them, we surrender more than a colony. We surrender what makes us human." The sergeant didn't answer immediately. His silence was as sharp as any reply, but when he finally spoke, it was with the grim acceptance of a man already resigned to follow. "Then we hunt them." The alien fleet's trail was faint but readable. Their drives left ion scars in the void, and Elias knew the Dominion rarely changed course once committed. He assembled his strike squad with precision, men he trusted not only to fight but to endure. Each of them carried wounds from battles past, but each of them carried something more dangerous, the unshakable conviction that survival was meaningless without honor. They moved quickly, boarding their corvette, the Iron Fong, its hull still scarred from the initial assault. Engines roared, and the stars stretched into ribbons as the vessel leapt into pursuit. Inside the Dominion ship, unknown to Elias but vital to his mission, the children were herded into containment chambers. Alien guards laughed in guttural tones, their mandibles clicking as they mocked the small, terrified figures. To them, the young were nothing but noisy cargo, soft flesh to barter or bait. The Dominion had no word for innocence. To them, there was strength or there was weakness, nothing between. The thought of an entire warrior species mobilizing to rescue beings who could not fight was incomprehensible. That incomprehension would prove their mistake. Back aboard the Iron Fong, Elias reviewed the tactical readouts with Davin at his side. The Dominion dreadnought was a mountain of steel against their dagger of a ship. Its shields alone could burn through their munitions before they landed a single critical strike. Still, Elias' eyes never wavered from the glowing silhouette on the display. He didn't see statistics or odds, he saw cages. He saw the faces of children who had clutched their teachers' hands while the world around them crumbled. "Tell me this isn't suicide," Davin muttered, though he was already strapping his armor. "It's not suicide if we succeed," Elias said, his tone flat but edged with iron. "And if we fail, then at least they'll know someone tried." That final note of conviction settled into the squad like gravity. They weren't chasing survival. They were chasing meaning. Each man knew that the universe might forget their names, but the children, if rescued, would carry forward the proof that humanity did not abandon its own. The iron fong closed the gap. Lights dimmed, weapon systems hummed awake, and the men fell silent in their stations. Elias stood at the heart of it all, a soldier sculpted by war, but defined by something greater than the battlefield. The Dominion thought humans weak for guarding their young, but they had never stood against a man like Elias Caron, who bore every child's absence as a personal wound. The stars seemed to hold their breath as the corvette slipped into the dreadnought's shadow. This was no longer a rescue. This was a declaration, unspoken yet absolute. Humanity would bleed, burn, and fight beyond reason for the future carried in the arms of its children. And in that truth lay a power the Dominion could never quantify. Elias checked his weapon one final time, gaze fixed on the looming bulk of the alien ship. "They took our children," he said, his voice low but fierce enough to etch itself into memory. "Now we take them back." The squad moved as one. The first step into the dark was made not with fear, but with the certainty that every second mattered. Behind them lay ash and ruin. Before them waited a fleet of monsters. But somewhere in the steel belly of that beast were the lives that justified every risk. The dreadnought's docking clamps came into view, vast jaws of metal waiting to close on anything daring enough to approach. Elias leaned forward, every muscle braced. This was the edge where purpose sharpened into action, where the weight of humanity's soul pressed on the trigger of a single man. And with that, the hunt truly began. "You said." Commander Vyrkl of the Dominion stood in the command chamber of his dreadnought, gazing at the hololithic display that pulsed with the rout of their captured prize. The children were secured, small figures huddled together behind force fields deep in the vessel's belly. His officers shifted uneasily, their mandibles clacking in agitation. They were warriors, bred for conquest, yet none of them could hide their distaste for this cargo. To them, it reeked of inefficiency, of weakness. Why waste resources on creatures that could neither labor nor fight? One lieutenant finally broke the silence. "Commander, forgive the challenge, but the logic is flawed. These juveniles hold no strategic value. They consume space, they whine, they are fragile. Better to leave them to perish and conserve strength for true battles." Vyrkl's gaze cut across the chamber, sharp as a blade. "You think as soldiers, bound to scales of cost and efficiency. But humans are not bound by such measures. They are irrational, dangerous." He lifted a claw, gesturing at the image of the children. "This will bring their warriors to us. This will force them into errors." The lieutenant lowered his eyes, unconvinced but cowed. Among the Dominion, disobedience to a commander was death, yet whispers traveled quickly. Their leader's obsession with humans had grown strange, almost unhealthy. They did not understand what he had seen years ago, when a lone human soldier broke through defenses with no hope of survival, charging into withering fire for the life of one child. That soldier had been cut down, his body scorched to ruin, yet Vyrkl remembered the image, his eyes blazing with something alien, something the Dominion had no word for. That memory clung to him, a riddle he could not resolve. Far from those uneasy officers, Elias and his men stalked through the void in their corvette, cloaked in silence and grim resolve. The iron fong moved with surgical precision, every maneuver calculated to avoid detection as they shadowed the dreadnought. In the cramped war room, Elias studied the schematics his scanners had scraped together, his jaw set like stone. The alien vessel was a leviathan, bristling with weapons and shielded by layers of energy fields. Against it, his squad was little more than flesh wrapped in armor. Sergeant Davin leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, eyes hard. "You've seen the numbers. Even if we breach, we'll be swallowed whole. Tell me, Elias, tell me this isn't madness." Elias looked up from the display, and for a moment, the iron mask cracked to reveal the raw drive beneath. "Madness is letting them grow up believing no one came for them. Madness is telling ourselves we're human while leaving our children in cages." His words cut through the stale air, not with passion but with conviction carved deep into bone. Davin's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, Not quite surrender. You'll get us all killed chasing ghosts. Not ghosts, Elias replied. Futures. Futures worth dying for. The room fell silent. The squad members shifted uneasily, but one by one, they nodded, each man binding himself to the unspoken oath. They were not soldiers following orders. They were guardians pledging their lives to an idea greater than survival. Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion dreadnought, VYRKL descended into the containment deck. The air reeked of fear and defiance. The children pressed against one another, whispering, some crying, some staring wide-eyed at the towering form of their captor. VYRKL's mandibles clicked, a sound that made them flinch, but one boy stepped forward. His voice shook, yet he spoke. You can lock us up, but our families will come for us. You'll see. The alien commander regarded him with an unreadable expression. Small, fragile, trembling. Yet the boy's defiance held a spark VYRKL recognized. They will come, he muttered, almost to himself. That is what makes them dangerous. The guards shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. To them, this was nonsense. To VYRKL, it was prophecy. Back in the void, the Iron Fong slipped closer, her engines barely humming, her crew stripped of everything but determination. Elias moved among his men, checking gear, recalibrating weapons, saying little. His leadership was not in speeches, but in the steadiness of his presence, in the way he bore the weight of every risk without flinching. He stopped before Davin, eyes locking with his sergeants. Once we're inside, there's no turning back. You know that. Davin grunted. I knew that the moment you said children. Elias almost allowed himself a smile, brief as the flicker of a star. He clasped Davin's shoulder once, then turned to the viewport. The dreadnought loomed ahead, a monstrous shadow against the canvas of stars. His jaw tightened. His thoughts were not of strategy or glory, but of small voices silenced in fear, of faces pressed against cold steel. That image drove him forward more than any order ever could. As the distance closed, as the Dominion vessel filled their vision, a strange symmetry unfolded. VYRKL, in his command chamber, brooded over the irrationality of his prey. Elias, in his corvette, steeled himself to prove that very irrationality was humanity's greatest weapon. Two leaders, bound on a collision course, each carrying a truth the other could not yet grasp. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. The hunter watched the hunted, and the hunted prepared for the hunter's strike. The children, silent in their cages, were the heart of it all, the prize, the bait, the reason. And as the dreadnought's vast silhouette swallowed the stars, Elias' voice broke the silence, low and certain. Prepare for boarding. We end this on their ship. You said. The docking clamps locked with a shudder that vibrated through the Iron Fong, a metallic growl swallowed by silence as Elias and his men readied for the breach. The corvette's hull had fused itself to the dreadnought's docking port, a surgical incision about to be carved into the Dominion war machine. Elias stood at the front, pulse rifle raised, armor scorched from earlier fights but steady as iron. His men waited behind him, hearts beating with the same rhythm. Warriors moving not toward survival, but toward purpose. The charge detonated. Metal screamed as the breach carved open, and the squad surged into the corridor like a flood of fire. Alien guards reeled back, their guttural cries echoing as plasma bolts seared through the air. Elias advanced without hesitation, every movement precise, his rifle spitting controlled bursts that dropped Dominion warriors one by one. His men followed, disciplined and relentless, their boots pounding against steel as they pushed deeper into the beast's belly. The dreadnought's hulls twisted like veins of a living creature, pulsing with sickly light. Resistance thickened with every step, Dominion troops pouring from side passages, their weapons shrieking with arcs of energy. But the humans fought with a ferocity that broke formations. Elias moved like a storm given flesh, striking with cold precision. Davin fought beside him, his battle axe, a relic of a soldier's stubborn defiance, slicing through alien armor with brutal efficiency. The The children's location lay marked on Elias' visor, a blinking signal deep within containment decks. Every firefight, every dead alien, was measured against that single destination. The squad lost men along the way, brave soldiers cut down by plasma fire, their bodies falling silent on alien steel, but none faltered. Each death hardened the survivors, sharpened their will. When Elias finally reached the containment sector, the sight clawed at him. Dozens of children pressed against shimmering force fields, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear and hope. Some cried out when they saw the armored humans burst into the chamber, voices cracking with relief. Elias lowered his rifle for the first time since boarding, his voice a gravel-laced anchor. "We're here. You're safe now." But the moment shattered with a heavy clang. The doors behind him slid open, revealing Commander Vyrkl. The alien silhouette filled the frame, massive and armored, his eyes burning with the Predator's fire. Around him, guards parted as though yielding to inevitability. Vyrkl's mandibles clicked, his voice carrying across the chamber like a growl carved from stone. "You risk everything for these larvae?" Elias turned, squaring himself between the children and the commander. His men raised weapons, but Elias lifted a hand, holding them back. This wasn't a skirmish, it was the collision of two truths. "They're more than you'll ever understand," he said, his tone sharp as a blade. The alien tilted his head, studying the human captain, as though dissecting a puzzle. "You trade soldiers' lives for weaklings. You defy logic, strategy, survival itself. Why?" Elias' eyes narrowed, his jaw set. "Because they are the future. Without them, we're nothing but dust on broken worlds. You see weakness. I see everything worth fighting for." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The children huddled behind the field, watching wide-eyed. Davin shifted beside Elias, muttering under his breath, "Enough words. Let's end this." Vyrkl stepped forward, his claws gleaming, his body a tower of strength. Elias raised his rifle, then lowered it deliberately. He slung it aside, drawing his combat blade instead. This wasn't a battle to be fought with distance. It was a duel, primal and absolute. The alien commander snarled approval, a warrior's acknowledgement. They clashed. Steel met claw in a storm of sparks, each strike reverberating through the chamber. Vyrkl's strength was monstrous, each blow enough to shatter bone, but Elias moved with a predator's economy, parrying, sidestepping, countering with precision born of desperation. Around them, soldiers and children alike stood frozen, bound by the gravity of the duel. The fight stretched into brutal minutes. Elias' blade carved shallow wounds across Vyrkl's armor, but each strike he received rattled his bones, bruised his ribs, forced blood to his lips. Still, he pressed on, driven not by his own survival but by the chorus of small voices watching from behind the force field. When his knees threatened to buckle, he heard them cry out for him, their voices carrying more strength than any command. With a final surge, Elias ducked under a sweeping claw, driving his blade upward into the alien's side. Vyrkl roared, staggering back, ichor spilling across the deck. Elias tore his blade free, chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking his face. The alien commander dropped to one knee, beaten but unbowed, his eyes burning with the realization of what had transpired. Elias leveled his weapon but did not strike. Instead, he spoke, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "I could end you here, but I won't. Because you need to live with this truth. You'll never break us. We fight for more than ourselves. We fight for them." The children's voices rose behind him, a mixture of relief and awe, the sound of hope rekindled. Vyrkl's mandibles twitched, his gaze flicking from Elias to the small faces beyond the barrier. For the first time, something unreadable passed across his alien features. Not fear, not hate, but recognition. Elias turned his back on him, signaling his men. "Free the children. We're leaving." His tone left no room for argument. The squad moved quickly, blasting controls, tearing open fields, gathering the young into protective arms. Davin lingered by Elias' side, his axe still raised, his eyes locked on the wounded commander. "You sure about sparing him?" the sergeant asked. Elias didn't look back. "Killing him proves nothing. Living with what he's seen? That'll haunt him longer than death ever could." The squad began their retreat, children carried between them, the chamber echoing with hurried footsteps and the pulse of alarms. Vyrkl remained on the floor, wounded but alive, his eyes following their departure. He did not roar in defiance. He simply watched, the seed of a question buried deep within him, a question that might one day unravel his people's certainty. Elias and his men pressed forward, weaving back through bloodied corridors toward the docking bay. Behind them, the Dominion commander's silence lingered like a shadow, the unspoken promise of conflict yet unfinished. The corridors shook with alarms as Elias and his men fought their way back to the breach point, children shielded between armored bodies, the dreadnought groaning like a beast in its death throes. Dominion warriors flooded from side passages, desperate to reclaim their captives, but the squad moved with surgical precision. Every burst of gunfire, every swing of Davin's axe, carved a path forward. Fearless in their desperation, the humans pressed on, each man a shield between the children and the onslaught. Elias took point, every strike measured, every decision sharpened by the weight of the lives clinging to his promise. When they finally reached the docking clamps, the iron thong waited, its battered hull gleaming in the haze of battle. The children were hurried aboard, their small faces lit with fragile hope as soldiers guided them through the breach. Elias lingered at the rear, covering the withdrawal, his rifle spitting fire until the last of the young had crossed into safety. Only then did he step through, sealing the breach behind him. The corvette tore free from the dreadnought's side, engines roaring, and surged into the abyss of space. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The children clung to one another, trembling, but their fear was no longer hollow. They looked at the men who had come for them and saw something larger than armor or weapons. They saw proof that humanity did not abandon its own. Elias moved among them, saying little, but each child who met his gaze found in it a silent oath that no cage could break them again. Davin dropped heavily onto a bench, blood streaking his armor, his axe resting across his knees. He gave Elias a look that was equal parts exhaustion and admiration. "You did it, Captain. Against everything, you did it." Elias shook his head, eyes sweeping across the rescued children. "We did it. And we'll do it again, as many times as it takes." His voice carried no triumph, only a promise weighed down with the cost already paid. Around him, the men of his squad sat in silence, some wounded, some grieving the brothers they had lost, but none with regret. Their sacrifice had meaning. That was enough. Far behind them, aboard the wounded Dominion dreadnought, Commander Vyrkl stood once more in his command chamber. His armor was cracked, ichor seeping from the wound Elias had carved, but his posture remained unbroken. His officers gathered, waiting for orders, but his gaze lingered on the stars, on the path where the human corvette had vanished. They expected rage, the call for pursuit, demands for vengeance. Instead, he spoke with a voice unlike any they had heard from him before. "We underestimated them. We thought them fragile for guarding their spawn. Yet they are strong because of it." Confusion rippled through the chamber. One officer hissed in protest. "They waste warriors' lives on children. That is not strength, it is madness." Vyrkl's mandibles clicked softly, his eyes narrowing. Madness, perhaps. But it is the kind of madness that makes them unyielding. They do not fight for resources or conquest. They fight for a future we cannot comprehend. That is why we have never broken them. His words silenced the chamber. Some officers recoiled, unwilling to accept such heresy, while others looked unsettled, questions rising in their minds like cracks in ancient stone. For the first time, doubt had wormed its way into the Dominion's certainty. Aboard the Iron Fong, the return to Allied space was quiet. The children slept in clusters, exhaustion overtaking fear, their breath soft against the low hum of the ship. Elias stood at the viewport, watching the stars whirl past, their light cold yet eternal. Davin joined him, silent for a moment before speaking. "You spared him, that commander. Why?" Elias didn't turn. His reflection in the glass was hard, lined by war. "Because death is easy. But living with what he saw, that will change him, or it will break him. Either way, humanity wins." Davin grunted, almost approving. "You think he'll understand?" "No," Elias said. "But he'll never forget. And that's enough." Silence settled between them again, companionable and heavy with meaning. Behind them, the rescued children stirred, small voices whispering in their dreams, unaware of the weight carried for them. Elias allowed himself a breath, not of relief, but of resolve. This victory was not the end. It was only proof that the fight was worth continuing, that humanity's so-called insanity was its greatest strength. When the Iron Fong finally docked at the fringes of human space, survivors of the colony gathered to meet them. The children rushed into waiting arms, families clinging to one another with a ferocity born of near loss. Soldiers stood at attention, watching silently as their people wept and held tight to the future that had almost been stolen. Elias did not step forward to claim recognition. He remained at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable, his presence steady. The mission had never been about glory. It had been about a promise fulfilled. Yet in his chest, beneath the armor and scars, a flame burned hotter than ever. He knew the Dominion would come again. They always did. And when they returned, they would remember this night, this impossible rescue, this glimpse into the heart of humanity. They would call it madness, they would call it weakness, but they would never forget. Elias turned from the crowd, his eyes lifting to the endless dark above. The stars stretched into infinity, each one a reminder of what remained to be defended. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of every life saved and every life lost. "They think us insane," he murmured. "Let them. Insanity is what keeps our children alive." And with that, the story of one raid ended, but the war for humanity's future pressed on, written not in conquest, but in the unyielding refusal to abandon what mattered most. The universe could not measure such defiance, and the Dominion could not kill it. For men like Elias Caron, it was not strategy or survival that defined them, but the unbreakable truth that as long as humanity fought for its children, it could never be defeated. "You said,